don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that anytime we upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thank you.
Hallelujah. You may be seated, giving praise and honor to the Most High, thanking Him for our lives, thanking Him for strength and good health, and another opportunity to gather before Him and worship before Him on this holy day. Asking that He would allow us the opportunity to receive knowledge, wisdom, and understanding at this time, that He would allow us to learn from His Word, the things that we are supposed to do, and especially from the things that we're not supposed to do. We thank the Most High for, once again, giving us an opportunity to call upon His name in this place. For we acknowledge that Yahweh is the God of the heavens and the earth, that in the beginning He created the heavens and the earth by Himself, as we read in the book of Genesis, and that is the God that we read about throughout the continuation of the Holy Scriptures. So we acknowledge that there's only one God, and even though throughout the history of the children of Yisrael, we've diverted our attention elsewhere, Yahweh continues to be God. And the gods that we decided to serve, the gods that we decided to worship, the gods that we decided to offer to, never existed. Amen. And as a result of that, that caused us to be scattered throughout the earth, because we acknowledged that Yahweh, who is the true and living God, became angry with us for breaking the covenant that we made with Him. For He has selected us out of all the families upon the face of the earth in order that we would serve Him and that He would be our God. So we thank Jehovah God for giving us an opportunity this day to worship before Him as we just did, to praise Him and to thank Him for all that He has done for us. For the worship and the service of God is a everyday thing. We know that we've given the opportunity to gather before Him on this holy day, but the service of God is an everyday thing, that He has given us opportunity. Once we wake up in the morning, we have no choice but to give praise unto the Most High, who gives us life on a daily basis, who clothes us on a daily basis, and who feeds us on a daily basis. So He's the one that provides us with everything that we need. So all we have to do is give Him our all and our praise and our worship unto Him, studying His word and in performing the words that He has commanded to do. At this time, we're going to continue on in the book of Jeremiah. So we know that Jehovah God selected, just to briefly go down the history, Jehovah God created the heavens and the earth. At a period of time, the entire earth was flooded because of the evil that was done. God saved Noah, and through Noah, the earth was repopulated through his children. And out of one person, out of that genealogy of Noah, God selected Abraham, and selected Abraham and his children, Isaac and Jacob, and through Jacob, the children of Yisrael, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, God selected Jacob and his children to be a special people unto Him, to be a holy people, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation, that, as we read about in the book of Exodus, as He spoke to the children of Israel after bringing us out of the land of Egypt, that house of bondage. And through a period of time, even although the Most High God did a lot, did a lot for the children of Israel, we turned our back on Him and decided to follow the other nations. The nations that God commanded us to remove from the land that He gave us, and we followed the nations that dwelled around the land of Yisrael that was given unto the children of Yisrael. And as a result of that, God didn't just immediately kick us out of the land. We read throughout the book of Leviticus, also in Deuteronomy, that the Most High would kick us out of the land if we decide to turn away from His word. So God was, quote unquote, patient with the children of Israel. As we read this day, God sent prophets on a continual basis to speak to the children of Israel, to warn us of the impending danger, to remind us of what He had already told Moses, that we read about once again in the book of Leviticus and the book of Deuteronomy, that He sent prophets constantly to remind us of what's going to happen if we continued to go in the path that we were walking in by walking away from Jehovah God. So we get to the prophet Jeremiah, who was one of the prophets selected by the Most High to speak to the children of Israel and continue to warn us of the impending danger that would happen to us if we continue to divert our attention away from the true and the living God. So throughout the process of time, Jeremiah continued to speak the word, and the children of Israel, we didn't want to hear what Jeremiah was saying, especially those that were in power, the kings, the princes, the priests, did not want to hear. And there were prophets that were not the prophets of Jehovah, but who the children of Israel went to get word. Those false prophets didn't want to hear what Jeremiah was saying also. So it came a point in time when the Most High sent, as he said once again in the beginning of Jeremiah, that there would be a nation from the north that would come down and destroy Israel and take Israel into captivity. So what we're reading about now with this point in the book of Jeremiah is what happened during that time when God sent Nebuchadnezzar, or sent his army to go into Jerusalem, which is the capital of Yisrael, which is the city where the house of God is. And Nebuzaradan, which is the captain of the host for Nebuchadnezzar, went in with the army of Babylon and destroyed the wall of Jerusalem, went into the city and burnt the house of God. So that's a very, very powerful statement to think about, that God's house got burnt down. But it's not all about the house. And God warned us about that as we read throughout the book of Jeremiah, that it's not about the house, or as we read in the scripture, as we may translate it as the temple of God. Because God does not dwell in a house. Because God's existence is beyond all of our existence. But that was just a place of worship that Jehovah God chose to have his name called at. So in the sight of the children of Israel, once we saw that symbol of God in our midst being burnt down, it made it seem like God was not with us any longer, which is true to an extent. God left us at that point, but because God has a covenant with us, he would not completely leave us. All we had to do is return to him. But that was just a symbol of the Babylonian army going in and destroying that house, burning that house down, taking the king into captivity, and taking many people out of the tribe of Judah and the many tribes that dwell among them into captivity. But Jeremiah was still an active prophet who Jehovah God was still speaking to continually. So even though Jeremiah was one that remained or was allowed to stay back in the land of Israel, amongst Israel that was still left behind by the Babylonians, Jehovah God continued to speak to Jeremiah. So throughout the process of time, as we read throughout the past couple of weeks, once the Babylonian army went in and destroyed Jerusalem and burnt the house of God, that Nebuchadnezzar sent Gedaliah to be governor over the children of Yisrael at that time. And then because of a quote-unquote civil war, as for a lack of a better term, civil war, Ishmael, who was an Israelite confederate with a foreign nation, with the Ammonites, killed Gedaliah, and as Chief Uziah read last week, that was what happened after Gedaliah was killed by Ishmael. But he was warned that Ishmael, just because you hear the name, he was not an Ishmaelite. He was actually an Israelite once again. That at this point that we're reading it now in the book of Jeremiah chapter 43, after Ishmael fled back to the Ammonites, after the remnant that he tried to take with him over there was saved, that the children of Israel asked Jeremiah to ask God what they should do at that point. And they said, whatever Jehovah God says, that's what we're going to do. But in reading that statement, they were on their way to Egypt. But they decided to ask Jeremiah to intercede for them on behalf of God, just to hear what Jehovah God wants them to do. And once again, they said that whatever Jehovah God says, if we should stay in the land of Israel, we're going to stay in the land of Israel. If we should go to Egypt, we're going to go to Egypt. But whatever Jehovah God says, that's exactly what we're going to do. And that's the words that they profess to Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah, after a period of time, it said 10 days, Jehovah God spoke to Jeremiah and in short, told Jeremiah to tell the people, stay in the land of Israel and serve the Babylonians in the land of Israel, and do not go into Egypt. Because if you go into Egypt, there were many verses of what's going to happen to the children of Israel that decided to go into Egypt. So as we get into this book of Jeremiah chapter 43, we're going to hear the response of the people after hearing what Jeremiah told them that Jehovah God said to do in terms of staying in the land of Israel and not going into Egypt. Jeremiah chapter 43.
And it came to pass that when Yirmiyahu had made an end of speaking unto all the people, that all the words of Jehovah their God, wherewith Jehovah their God had sent him to them, even all these words, then spoke Azariah ben Hoshea, and Yohanan the son of Kareah, and all the proud men, saying unto Yirmiyahu, Thou speakest falsely. Jehovah our God hath not sent you to say, Ye shall not go into Egypt to sojourn there. But Baruch the son of Neriah setteth thee on against us to deliver us into the hand of the Chaldeans, that they may put us to death and carry us away captive to Babylon.
Because the children of Israel, and remember, Yochanan, the son of Kwareach, he was the one that tried to warn Gedaliah about Ishmael coming to kill him. And he was the one that saved the remnant of Yisrael that Ishmael was taken over to the land of the Ammonites. So he was one amongst the heads of the armies of the hosts of Yisrael. So he was one of them that asked Jeremiah, what should we do? Should we stay in Egypt? Should we go into Egypt or should we stay in Israel? And once again, Jeremiah, when you read in chapter 42, told them exactly what Jehovah God said that they should do. But in hearing what Jeremiah said, because their mind was made up to go into Egypt. So sometimes, we have to know when to open our mind to the word of God as opposed to just listening to what we want to hear. So what they wanted to do was go into Egypt. That's what they wanted to do to begin with. So they lied basically once you go back to 42, and they said that whatever Jehovah God said that we should do, we will do. But they didn't want to believe Jeremiah, and they said that it was Baruch, who was his scribe, is the one that is enticing Jeremiah to tell the people. So they tried to make up in their own mind that it wasn't Jehovah God speaking to Jeremiah, but it was Baruch, the son of Neriah, who was Jeremiah's scribe, that was the one that was lying to Jeremiah and trying to get the people to stay in the land, because the people did not want to stay in the land because they know that they would have to be servant to the Babylonians. And they were already scared of the Babylonians based on what the Babylonians did to Jerusalem, what they did to the house of God, and also the fact that Gedaliah was the one that was set up as the governor by Nebuchadnezzar to govern Israel. Knowing that he was assassinated, they were scared of what Nebuchadnezzar would do as a retaliation in regards to that. So they had it in their mind already that they wanted to just go into Egypt and not have to deal with Babylon at all. So as a result of that, they also did not listen to anything that Jehovah God told them. And then once again, they tried to put it on Baruch. Time permitting, we'll talk about Baruch, his place in history, the historicity of Baruch himself, and how he's been proven to be an actual person that lived. So there's a lot of things that within this chapter that can be utilized to show that the children of Israel existed and the people that we read about existed as well. So once again, time permitted. But that just shows how, we read about Baruch very scarcely in the book of Jeremiah. But Baruch, when you think about in the historical world, he was actually someone that was very important that many people wrote about and many people proved his existence, even more so than Jeremiah. People are still trying to prove the existence of Jeremiah, but the existence of Baruch is actually very presently known. So it just shows how important of a person Baruch was in history. And even here, when the people are saying that Baruch is the one telling Jeremiah, that just shows you what the people thought about the relationship between Baruch and Jeremiah. So all the time that we're reading about Jeremiah speaking the word of God, the people are actually thinking, because they know that Baruch is his scribe or quote-unquote sidekick also, they're thinking all the while that Baruch is the one that is actually in charge. Because there were many times we read in the chapter prior that when Jeremiah didn't go personally to speak to the people, he would send Baruch to speak to the people. So in the minds of Israel, Baruch was the one that was actually the one trying to run things for them. And they didn't want to fall for that. Continue.
Verse 4. So Yohanan the son of Kareah and all the captains of the forces and all the people hearkened not unto the voice of Yahweh to dwell in the land of Yehudah. But Yochanan the son of Kareah and all the captains of the forces took all the remnant of Yehudah that were returned from all the nations whither they had been driven to sojourn in the land of Yehudah, the men, the women, the children, and the king's daughters, every person that Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah, the son of Achikam, the son of Shaphan, and Yirmiyahu the prophet, and Baruch the son of Neriah, and they came into the land, for they hearkened not to the voice of Yahweh, and they came even to Taphanes.
So once again, when we pray to God and we ask God to show us something, we may have questions in our lives, and we ask God to show us a sign. We may ask God to speak to us however way that he could communicate with us. Whatever that sign is or whatever that communication is, you have to be careful and make sure that you follow everything that is given unto you. Don't ask God or don't pray to God for something, or don't make vows to God that you're going to do something if he does this and then do opposite. And that's what the children of Israel did here. That they wanted to hear the word of God coming out of the mouth of Jeremiah, and they vowed and said that whatever Jehovah God said that we should do, we will do. But as it said here twice within that they did not hearken to the word of Yahweh. And that's what started the problems that we are about to read within this chapter and the next chapter as well, because they started off on the bad foot. All they had to do was stay in the land of Israel and serve Babylon for those 70 years that God already told Jeremiah that they would serve Babylon, and at the end of that, they would get a reprieve. But there was some that already went to captivity in Babylon. When we get to the book of Ezekiel, which is running concurrently with Jeremiah, because Ezekiel is prophesying in Babylon while Jeremiah is prophesying in the land of Israel. And now when we get to the rest of this chapter, the next chapter, he's prophesying or speak to the children of Israel in Egypt. Then they already started off wrong because they already went into Egypt against the word of God, but they wanted to follow their own mind. So once again, we have to be careful because sometimes our minds are made up on what we want to do, and we want to include God in our plans as opposed to following God's plan. And that's what happened in this instant. As I said in the prior chapter, they were already going into Egypt after saving the remnant of the people from Ishmael. Their mind was already made up to go into Egypt. So they were stubborn that they wanted to do what they wanted to do, but they wanted to get approval from God for what they wanted to do. And that's not how life works. We can't do what we want to do and think that God is going to be approving of what we want to do. Or we expect God to be approving of what we want to do. We have to do what God approves for us to do. So if you open yourself up in prayer to speak to the Most High God and just ask the Most High God, ask Jehovah God for something, or if you say that if this happens and I'm going to do this, then make sure you do that. As we continue to read in the book of, when we get to the book of Numbers, we're going to read that whatever we profess out of our mouths, we have to make sure that we hold that we do that. So now the children of Israel are leaving out of the territory of Judah, and then now they're dwelling in CHOKMAH, or Tapanese, as it's said in English, which is on the northeastern edge of Egypt. So it's one of the first places in Egypt that you would get to when coming out of the territory of Judah. So once again, they're traveling southwest, this place called CHOKMAH, which is actually the city of Daphne if you look at it today. And as we read on, we'll get to that point, shown also there's a actual site in the city Daphne that the children of Israel dwelt in. Continue.
Verse 8. Then the word of Yahweh came to Yirmiyahu in Taphanes, saying, take great stones in your hand, and hide them in a mortar, in the framework which is in the entry of Pharaoh's house in Taphanes, and in the sight of the men of Yehuda, and say unto them, thus saith Yahweh Sabaoth, Elohei Yisrael, behold, I will send and take Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will set his throne up upon these stones that I have hid. He shall spread his royal pavilion over them, and he shall come and shall smite the land of Egypt, such as offer death to death, and such as offer captivity to captivity, and such as offer the sword to the sword.
So God is telling Jeremiah to tell the people that they're not going to escape. Just because you think that you went under the shadow or the protection of Egypt, you're not going to be safe. So he told them, take these stones. And he says, take the stones, and just to explain it in an up-to-date manner, you're taking stones and you're putting in mortar. So like, mortar you could use to make concrete. It's like when you see people laying out a sidewalk, they have the cement going. And then when they lay it down and it dries up, then that's how you get your sidewalk, that's how you get your pavement. So Jeremiah is taking stones and putting it within this mortar that is going to be placed on, depending on how it is, either a pavement or a wall of a building. And the significance of that is those stones cannot blend in with that pavement. Even though the pavement may harden, those stones are still within that pavement. So God is telling the children of Israel that just because you think you're dwelling in Egypt, you're not going to dwell under the protection. You're not going to be able to blend in with Egypt. Because when God sends that destruction on Egypt, you're going to feel it also. So those stones that are within that mortar, that even though once that mortar hardens and it becomes that sidewalk, it becomes that pavement, or it's on the side of a wall, those stones still do not mesh with the mortar when it hardens. Right. You can see what's on the outside. So like you see the sidewalk on the top, but those stones are still there. So when somebody comes to break up that concrete, break up that sidewalk, that concrete and the stones within it are also going to be broken down. So there's no way that the children of Israel are supposed to blend in with Egypt or any other nation. Those stones are what those stones are, and the mortar becomes what that mortar is, but the two don't mesh, even though one is covering the other. So God is saying that when Nebuchadnezzar comes in to destroy Egypt, everybody's going to get wiped out and nobody's going to be safe. So as a sign, he's telling them, take these stones, put it in the mortar, as a sign to let them know you're not going to be able to blend in and you're not going to be able to be safe. When that mortar hardens over the stones within it are still not going to be safe when somebody breaks it. So when Nebuchadnezzar comes in to destroy Egypt, Israel is not going to be safe within Egypt. Continue.
Verse 12. And I will kindle a fire in the house of the gods of Egypt, and he shall burn them and carry them away captive. And he shall fold up the land of Egypt as a shepherd folds up his garment. And he shall go forth from thence in peace. He shall also break the pillars of Beit Shemesh, that is in the land of Egypt, and the houses of the idols of Egypt shall he burn with fire.
So for the children of Israel, if Jehovah God allowed his own house to be burnt, what makes Israel think that the houses of the worship of Egypt is going to be safe? The house of the true and the living God was already destroyed in the sight of everybody that was here, witnessed what happened in Jerusalem. And they think that they could go to Egypt and be protected by Egyptian culture and the Egyptian gods. So if the house in Jerusalem was not safe, what makes them think that gods that do not exist are going to have houses that are not going to be safe? So the God that sees all things, he's telling them that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in, and just like a shepherd takes his clothing and he owns the clothing and just, puts it on, Nebuchadnezzar is going to come in and own Egypt the same way and just put on Egypt as a shepherd puts on clothes. So he's going to own Egypt and wear Egypt as a shepherd wears his clothes. And that's the description that God has given to the children of Israel. But as we get to the next chapter, we're going to see that we did not listen. That we were warned, but we still did not listen. So it mentioned that God is going to allow Nebuchadnezzar to come in, destroy the gods of Egypt, break down the pillars of Beit Shemesh, which is actually the house of the sun, that is in the land of Egypt, because the Egyptians worshiped the sun. So there were houses that they would worship the sun in, or worship the sun god in. So God is saying that he's going to destroy that house that they worship the sun god in. Continue.
Chapter 44.
This is fine. I don't want to assume.
Not yet.
No.
The word that came to Yirmiyahu concerning all the Judites that dwelt in the land of Egypt, that dwelt at Migdol and Taphanes and Noph, and in the country of Patros, saying, Thus saith Yehovah Tzebaoth, Elohei Israel, you've seen all the evil that I have brought upon Jerusalem and upon all the cities of Yehudah. And behold, this day they are a desolation, and no man dwells therein, because of their wickedness which they have committed to provoke me, and that they went to offer and serve other gods whom they knew not, neither they nor your fathers.
So there's some time has passed between the end of chapter 43 and beginning of chapter 44. Because as it mentioned now, the children of Israel that dwelling in Egypt, they dwelt in Migdol, which is a site also in northeastern Egypt, and Tahpanhes, which is once again the city today in Egypt called Daphne. And also when in the prior chapter 43, there's a site in that city today which is called Qasar bint El Yehudi, which they say is the site that the children of Israel dwelt in after coming out of the land of Egypt. So it's just interesting that there are places, especially this place, which is named after the children of Israel in the same city that we just read about in chapter 43. But as we continue on, they're dwelling in Migdol, in Tahpanhes. Now also in Noph, which is actually the city of Memphis, which is actually further south in Egypt, which is actually the capital of Egypt, which is still far away from Tahpanhes and Migdol. It's much further south. And once again, that's the city called Memphis, which at one time was a capital of Egypt. And then it says in the country of Patros, which is known as Upper Egypt. What if you know when Egyptians call Upper Egypt, which is actually the south part of Egypt. So it just shows that there was time that existed between 43 and 44, because the children of Israel now spread further south and dwelling, and they're spread out throughout the land of Egypt, from Lower Egypt, which is actually the northern part of Egypt, to Upper Egypt, which is actually the southern part of Egypt, as they traveled down the Nile River. And also, it's something that people can look up on their own. There was a territory, which is, we spoke about this many times before, Elephantine in Egypt, which is an island in the Nile River, where the children of Israel dwelt for at least 100 years. And what they found there was correspondence, letters, what they call the Elephantine papyri, which is correspondence between the children of Israel in that island in the Nile River, communicating with the children of Israel. This was before the destruction of the temple, of course. So it just shows that there were the children of Israel dwelling in the land of Egypt, and that throughout a period of time that we built the house of God to the true and living God in the land of Egypt, which we're not supposed to do, of course, by the way. But they built the house of God. They called it the temple of Yahweh. But also in that site, which is going to connect to what we read here, they worship, when you see the records of it, they worship Yahweh as well as Anat. And Anat is the queen of heaven that we're going to read about in this chapter. So they always coupled, when we read throughout the book of Jeremiah, and it shows that when God continues to say that he's God by himself, the children of Israel were always coupling the true and the living God with someone else. And that's what other nations always did. They had a male figure, other nations had a male figure as the supreme God, and a female goddess as a supreme goddess that they always connected together. But Jehovah God, how he separates himself from the worship that other people had, is he continues to say that he's God by himself and that he needs no consort. Right. While the other nations, when they worship their gods, they always had a consort for their gods. Continue.
Howbeit, I sent unto you all my servants the prophets, sending them betimes and often, saying, Oh, do not this abominable thing that I hate. But they hearken not, nor incline their ears from their wickedness, to forbear offering unto other gods. Wherefore my fury and my anger was poured out, and was kindled in the cities of Yehudah and in the streets of Yerushalayim. And they are wasted and desolate as this day.
So God is telling Jeremiah to warn the people and let them know that you witness what happened in the land of Israel. You witness how Jerusalem was destroyed. You witness how the house of God was destroyed. You witness how the cities around Jerusalem were destroyed and how they're all desolate. Either the people got taken into captivity in Babylon, or as it said in the prior chapter, people were taken captive by Israel into the land of Egypt. So where the land of Israel is actually desolate at this time. So God is warning them that he did send them prophets constantly to let them know that this would happen. So now that you get into Egypt, it doesn't mean that you should continue doing the same thing that you were doing before. Because the way you got into Egypt and into Babylon is by worshiping false gods. So the way to get out of Egypt and Babylon is not by continuing to worship false gods. So the same thing with the children of Israel today as we're scattered throughout the earth. The way that we're going to get out of captivity is not by worshiping false gods. As it said in Deuteronomy chapter 30, once we recognize the blessing and the curse and turn back to the true and the living God, then he will deliver us from all the lands that he has scattered us to. So we have to recognize the truth from the lies that are being taught to us and make sure that we're following the truth of God and not following the lies of the nations, because that's the only way we're going to get out of the situation that we're in. Continue.
Verse 7. Now therefore thus saith Yehovah, the God of Yisrael, wherefore commit ye this great evil against your own selves, to cut off from you man and woman, infant and suckling, out of the midst of Yehudah, to leave none remaining, and that you provoke me with the works of your hands, offering unto other gods in the land of Egypt, whither ye are gone to sojourn, that ye may be cut off, and that ye may be a curse and a reproach among all the nations of the earth. Have ye forgotten the wicked deeds of your fathers, and the wicked deeds of the kings of Yehudah, and the wicked deeds of their wives, and your own wicked deeds, and the wicked deeds of your wives, which they commit in the land of Yehudah and in the streets of Yerushalayim?
So God is not relenting on anything that he told them before. And he's warning them, remember all of the evil deeds that you did and your progenitors did that got you in this predicament. And that's not going to get you out of the predicament that you're in right now. Remember everything that they did, all of the evil deeds that they did, and by worshiping false gods and by sacrificing the false gods. And that caused Israel to become a reproach in Babylon and in the land of Egypt. So God gave us a lot of time. We spent a lot of time from the time of King David, dealing with going before the time of Joshua, up until his time to Zedekiah, who was the last king. There was hundreds of years that the children of Israel were in the land. And God was once again patient with the children of Israel and did not remove us from the land up until this point. So God is even reminding the children of Israel that's in Egypt. So Jeremiah has to make sure this word goes out. And once again, the children of Israel are dwelling all throughout Egypt. And they're steeped in Egyptian culture at this time, worshiping false gods. So once again, it was better for Israel to stay within Israel, as God said, and serve Babylon in Israel. At least we would have peace to serve the true and the living God and just wait out that 70-year sentence. But now that we went into Egypt, God is visiting us there. Continue.
They are not humble even until this day, neither have they feared, nor walked in my law, nor in my statutes, that are set before you and before your fathers. Therefore thus saith Yehovah Tzebaoth, Elohei Yisrael, behold, I will set my face against you for evil, to cut off all Yehuda. And I will take the remnant of Yehuda that have set their faces to go into the land of Egypt to sojourn there, and they shall all be consumed. In the land of Egypt they shall fall. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine. They shall die, from the least even to the greatest, by the sword and by famine. And they shall be an execration and an astonishment and a curse and a reproach.
So going into Egypt is once again not going to hide us from the wrath of the Most High God. As it said in the chapter prior, when Jeremiah took those stones and put it in the mortar, those stones which represented Israel is not going to be able to hide under the pavilion of Egypt, which became that mortar that hardened and became a pavement. So God is saying that even there, we are going to be a reproach to the Egyptians. Just as the children of Israel are a reproach today everywhere we are scattered throughout the earth, the children of Israel were a reproach in the land of Egypt, to where Egypt did not want us to go, did not want us to be around them. And also, God is going to be very angry for a few reasons. Number one, of course, because we're bowing down to false gods in the land of Egypt. But remember, God brought us out of Egypt. So he destroyed Egypt so that he could bring us out to safety so that we could serve him alone. So that's like that's like Lael beating up somebody that he ran into in the street, and then his sons go to live in the house of the person that Lael beat up. That's what happened when we ran back into Egypt for help. That's another reason why God is angry with us, because the same country that God destroyed and destroyed their gods, we ran back into for help from Babylon. So that's one of the reasons why God is very angry with us, because once again, we're serving foreign gods other than serving the true and living God, and we're running for protection to the people that God had already destroyed. So that's why God is angry with us, because now we're showing Egypt that their gods were better than our God. Because we were running from Babylon to go for protection in Egypt. Where it was better for us, once again, to just stay in Israel and to show Babylon and Egypt that we would just want to dwell under the protection of Jehovah God. But we decided to run into Egypt to show a sign that we're going under the protection of the God of the sun, which they worshipped. Continue.
13. For I will punish them that dwell in the land of Egypt, as I have punished Jerusalem by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence, so that none of the remnant of Yehuda that are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there shall escape or remain, that they should return to the land of Yehuda, to which they have desire to return to dwell there, for none shall return save such as shall escape.
Because God's going to allow some to escape as a sign. But God's going to send famine into Egypt. God is going to send a sword into Egypt. And he's going to cause destruction to happen to the children of Israel within Egypt. So if we decide to run to Egypt for help, Egypt is not going to help us. Just like today, all the countries that we're living in, we're not supposed to run to them for help. We run to Jehovah God for help, because Jehovah God is the only one that can save us. We run to someone else for help, and God is going to destroy us and them, just to show that he's the only one that can save. And that's what the children of Israel are going to have to face, being in Egypt, because we ran to Egypt for help. That sword that chased us in the land of Egypt, the land of Israel, is going to find us in the land of Egypt. That famine that we ran from in the land of Israel, now the Egyptians, where we thought that they had a lot of food that they could sustain us and them, God is going to cause them to have famine as well. Continue.
15. Then all the men who knew that their wives were offering unto other gods, and all the women that stood by, a great assembly, even all the people that dwelt in the land of Egypt, and Patros answered Yirmiyahu, saying, As for the word that you have spoken unto us in the name of Yehovah, we will not hearken unto you, but we will certainly perform every word that is gone forth out of our mouths, to offer to the Queen Mother of Heaven, to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, us, our fathers, our kings, our princes, in the city of Yehuda, and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food, and we were well, and saw no evil.
And this is what you call cognitive dissonance, that they have it right now. So what they're saying is that even though Jeremiah is warning them about what's going to happen if they continue to serve false gods, at this time they're very bold. Their statement before we read in the prior chapter, their statement was just, we're going to go into Egypt. Now when Jeremiah is speaking to them, they're saying, we're not going to serve Jehovah God. And we're going to continue following what we're doing right now. We're going to continue, as we're going to say in this chapter, baking that bread to the Queen of Heaven. Because what they're thinking in their mind is that what they said here, and what they can continue saying is that when they serve the false gods, and just to put it plain like that, because they were serving false gods, what they're saying is that when they serve false gods, they live better than what they're living like right now. That's like the children of Israel when we come into the truth and we start to think that our lives were better before. Not realizing how blessed we are now, serving the true and living God, but we tend to compare our lives now as before. So what they're saying is that when we were serving the Ashtaroth and serving Baal, that everything was good for us. But when they're saying when King Josiah came and started cleaning up the land, then the danger started coming. But the danger came after they reverted from what Josiah was trying to teach them and going back into serving false gods. And that's what they don't realize. So they're saying that all that time during the King Manasseh, who reigned for 55 years, the longest reigning king in the land of Israel, and one of the most evil kings of the kings of the land of Israel, they're saying that when we served the false gods during that time, we were living better. When Josiah came and started cleaning stuff up, then all of a sudden we started worrying about Babylon, we started worrying about Assyria, started worrying about Egypt, but they're not thinking that it was their own ways that caused the destruction to come in. King Josiah did the best that he could, but when they started to revert back to serving false gods, that's when this drama came in. But in their mind, they're looking at the opposite. They're saying that things were good for us when we served the false gods, so therefore they're saying that we're going to continue doing exactly what we're doing right now. Even though doing exactly what they're doing right now caused them to be dwelling in Egypt as opposed to living in Israel as they were supposed to at this time. Continue.
18. But since we left off to offer to the Queen of Heaven and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things and have been consumed by the sword and by famine. And is it we that offer to the Queen of Heaven and pour out drink offering unto her? Did we make her cakes in her image and pour out drink offerings unto her without our husbands?
So what's happening when you with the worship with the Queen of Heaven? And just to briefly go into that. Way before in ancient society dealing with Mesopotamia, the original Queen of Heaven was Inanna. Then many people have heard the name Ishtar, which is the same as Inanna, but that's who the Babylonians served. And that was the Queen of Heaven at that time. Then you have, from Ishtar, you had Anat, which was served, who was worshipped throughout that region, what we call the Middle Eastern region. Then within the territory of the Canaanites, a term that pops up here a lot in the scriptures, Ashtaroth. That was also the Queen of Heaven. That's just a different variation or different story of the same individual that people were worshiping based on the nation that was worshiping that deity. Then from Ashtaroth, you had the Asherah, which you also read about. Then in Egypt, they had Isis, who was the Queen of Heaven, which is also a comparable story to, once again, from going from Inanna to Anat all the way down. Then from Isis, when the Greeks come in, once again, these stories change names,
Right.
but there's a parallel in the stories that exist for the gods and goddesses of the time. It's a recycled story all around. So it starts off with Sumer in Mesopotamia, goes to Babylon, goes to Canaan, goes to Egypt. When the Greeks come into Egypt, what they do is just switch the name Isis to Hera. And then from Hera, when the Romans took over the Greeks, then you had Juno. So now all of these are referenced as the Queen of Heaven. And then when Christianity came into play, the Queen of Heaven was, or is, that people worship today, Mary. In the liturgy of Christianity or Catholicism, they reference Mary as the Queen of Heaven. So the same Queen of Heaven that God is warning the children of Israel about worshiping back as we read in Jeremiah, is the same Queen of Heaven that people are worshiping today in Catholicism, that God already warned us about it. The names just changed, but the stories stayed the same. Because these goddesses married the supreme gods or the male figure gods of those nations that they were worshipped in. And also had children by those male gods, which became the next big god. So the same thing with Isis when she had a child with Osiris, who had Horus. And when you see a statue or depiction of Isis holding the baby, it's the same depiction that you see with Mary holding JC. The same story continued on as nations took over other nations. They took over the territory and took the stories of their gods along with it. So this history of the baking the cakes of the Queen of Heaven was basically done making unleavened bread and stamping it with the symbol of, at this time, Anat. But once again, as you trace the history of what the Queen of Heaven was to all of these nations, it led from Inanna all the way to Catholicism with Mary. Same story, went from nation to nation. Continue.
20. Then Yirmiyahu said unto all the people, to the men, to the women, And even all the people that had given him that answer, saying, the offering that he offered in the cities of Yehuda and in the streets of Yerushalayim, you and your fathers, your kings, your princes, and the people of the land, did not Yehovah remember them, and came it not into his mind, so that Yehovah could no longer bear because of the evil of your doings, and because of the abominations which ye have committed. Therefore is your land become desolate and an astonishment, a curse without inhabitants as it is this day, because ye have offered, and because ye have sinned against Yehovah, and have not hearkened unto the voice of Yehovah, nor walked in his law, nor in his statutes, nor in his testimonies. Therefore this evil has happened unto you as it is this day.
And once again, going back to the Queen of Heaven, it was something that primarily the women did. So what the women are saying is that we did this with our husbands. We didn't do this behind the backs of our husbands. So even though Jeremiah is talking to the women that were baking the cakes or baking the bread to the Queen of Heaven, their response is, we're going to continue doing what we're doing now, and our husbands are the one that already approved this for us to continue to do. So even though you're telling us what you're telling us, we're all on, they're saying us and our husband are on the same page.
Right.
So the husbands are saying we're not going to change, and the wives are saying we're not going to change. Continue.
24. Moreover, Yirmiyahu said unto all the people and to all the women, hear the word of Yahuwah, O Yehuda, that are in the land of Egypt. Thus saith Yahuwah Tzebaot Elohei Israel, you and your wives both have spoken with your mouths, and with your hands have fulfilled it, saying, we will surely perform our vows that we have vowed, to offer to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her. Yet ye shall surely establish your vows, and shall surely perform your vows.
And what's being said that's interesting is that God is noticing how they're willing to keep their vows to a false God. But all of the vows that they made that we read in chapter 42 to him, we did not keep. When they vowed and said that whatever Yehovah God said that we should do, whether we should stay in the land of Israel or go to Egypt, we're going to follow, that's what we're going to do. But God is telling them that you're willing to keep your vows to a God that does not exist, or a God that does not exist, a God didn't even hear your vows. So therefore, as a result of this, then this is what's going to happen to you. Continue.
Therefore, hear ye the word of Yehovah, O Yehuda that dwells in the land of Egypt. Behold, I have sworn by my great name, saith Yehovah, that my name shall no more be named in the mouth of any man of Yehuda in all the land of Egypt, saying, as Yehovah liveth.
So Yehovah God is saying that you're going to make a vow to the false gods that you're going to keep. Yehovah is saying he's vowing to his own name, which he will keep. And he's going to cause them to be destroyed, and they're not going to be able to ever again say his name. So when that trouble really comes, when that sword from Nebuchadnezzar comes into Egypt, they're not going to be able to turn to Yehovah God and call upon his name for any type of help or any type of salvation, because he's telling them you already want to fulfill your vows to a false God. You're just going to have to take whatever comes to you that Yehovah God is going to send unto them. Continue.
27. Behold, I will watch over them for evil and not for good. And all the men of Yehuda that are in the land of Egypt shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, until there be an end of them, and that they escape the sword. And they that escape the sword shall return out of the land of Egypt into the land of Yehuda, few in number. And all the remnant of Yehuda that are gone into the land of Egypt shall sojourn there. That shall sojourn there shall know whose word shall stand, mine or theirs. And this shall be the sign unto you, saith Yehovah, that I will punish you in this place, that ye may know that my word shall surely stand against you for evil. Thus saith Yehovah, behold, I will give Pharaoh, Hophra, king of Egypt, into the hand of his enemies, and into the hand of them that seek his life, as I gave Zedekiah, the king of Yehuda, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, his enemy, that sought his life.
So talking about the Pharaoh Hophra, which in history is actually the Pharaoh Apries. And what God is saying is interesting. He didn't say that he's going to give Pharaoh Hophra into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. He said he's going to give him into the hand of his enemies, and his enemies actually were the Egyptians, because there was a period of time, when you read in Jeremiah chapter 37, verse 5, when it talks about, and Pharaoh's army was come forth out of Egypt, and when the Chaldeans that besieged Jerusalem heard tidings of them, they broke up from Jerusalem. So Zedekiah had hired this same Pharaoh Hophra, which you look in history as Apries. He hired this Pharaoh to come and save him prior. And when the Babylonians heard that army was coming up, and Apries or Hophra was actually a new king at this time. He started in 570 BCE. And he was a new Pharaoh at this time. And he went in, and you also read that in verse 11 of the same chapter, that this was the same Pharaoh that helped the children of Israel to repel Babylon at that time. But now, Nebuchadnezzar, as he's gaining strength, because Nebuchadnezzar was also new. But now that Nebuchadnezzar gets gained strength, he's not afraid of Apries or Hophra. So what happened is there was Apries or Hophra was a very successful Pharaoh and warrior. But there was a war that he had with the Greeks that he lost in. So what happened at that time, that the people, the Egyptians, his own army, decided to place Amasis, who became Ahmose II, as Pharaoh, while Hophra was still alive. So when you read in the history, you see that the Egyptians actually, first they chased Hophra out of Egypt, but then he went into Babylon for help and came back with Babylon. And then also, but the people captured him and also put him to death later on. So that's why it doesn't say that Hophra was going to be put to death by the Babylonians, by his enemies, which was actually his own people, because there was a military coup that occurred in the land of Egypt where they took over. Continue. Oh, well, actually, yeah, go ahead real quick. But Nebuchadnezzar actually went into Egypt to fight a war with them. That was later on, after Apries or Hophra was actually defeated, and that was later on, like in 569 BCE. And this is just a real quick, so we're going to talk about Baruch, the son of Neriah, and his place in history, and then we're done.
Chapter 45. The word that Yirmiyahu the prophet spoke unto Baruch the son of Neriah, when he wrote these words in a book at the mouth of Yirmiyahu, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim ben Josiah, king of Yehudah, saying, Thus saith Yahweh God of Yisrael concerning thee, O Baruch. Thou didst say, Woe is me now, for Yahweh hath added sorrow to my pain. I am weary with my groanings, and I find no rest. Thus shalt thou say unto him, Thus saith Yahweh, Behold, that which I have built will I break down, and that which I have planted will I pluck up, and this is the whole land. And seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not. For behold, I will bring evil upon all flesh, saith Yahweh. But thy life I will give unto thee for a prey in all the places whither thou goest.
So Baruch was just, once again, the scribe of Jeremiah. He himself had a connection with Yahweh God. And what Yahweh God is saying to him at this time is that all these things that, once again, this is going back, because it says that he's speaking to the prophet Baruch, or he's speaking to Baruch during the time of Jehoiakim during this time. So this is going back to that time. And Baruch was the one that was by Jeremiah as he's receiving this prophecy. And Baruch himself was just worried also what's going to happen to Israel. But God is saying, basically, as at the end here, saying that his life is going to be a prey. He's still going to be alive, but he's still going to have to worry everywhere that he goes. So going back to now or later on, because the book of Jeremiah doesn't go in chronological order. So when Baruch is in the land of Egypt, he's still living his life as a prey, but he's still going to survive. So God has given him some comfort that even though he's going to have to face some drama wherever Israel goes, he's still going to be alive and still be able to witness everything that God said. So when we get into the later chapters of Jeremiah now, it's going to be about God speaking to Jeremiah about what the nation or what's going to happen to the other nations. But once again, Baruch was a person in history that many people have proved exist, that they were what they would call boule or bula, however you want to pronounce it, but they're actually seal stamps that people found in various locations, at least 2, that bear the name of Baruch, the son of Neriah. And they said that that's what they're still trying to prove. These were found years ago in different locations. But they were found in the land of Israel through excavations. And these are what people are saying is his actual seal stamp. So when we read that he was writing, because once again, he was told in various places to write the words of Jeremiah. So he's credited for actually compiling the book of Jeremiah. And many people have proved that throughout the existence of history as well. So there were seal stamps that were found of him that were used to stamp the documents that he was writing the book of Jeremiah with. So once again, even though we don't read much about Baruch throughout the book of Jeremiah, there's that, and there's many things, there is no time to go on with that, but that proves the existence of Baruch being the scribe of Jeremiah. So we thank the Most High God for allowing us to be alive, praying that he would allow us to hear his words and not be stubborn like the people that we read about just now. These are the people that we come from, and we are the ones that escaped through captivity. We didn't fall by the sword. We didn't fall by the famine. God allowed us to be saved, but so as us being saved, we are not supposed to be stubborn like those that we read about. And these are examples that we have to read about. So there's a lot of history in here, things that we can research to prove that we are the children of Yisrael, and even beyond that, that Jehovah God is the true and the living God. So thanking him for all of our lives as we come to worship before him on this day. Hallelujah.